Hello, welcome back to Kevin Can't Play Today. I'm your host, Kevin. Today we have our usual War Thunder docuseries. Today we'll be covering the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk. Probably my second favorite fighter of World War II, right after the P-51 Mustang. Strap in, folks. This one's going to be a bit of a long one. We have a lot to cover. Fantastic piece of legendary aircraft right here, and I'm excited to present it to you. So without much further ado, let's get rid of that and those and take a look at the P-40. This is the P-40E1 model in particular. This plane is probably one of the most prolific planes in the American arsenal in World War II, having served in pretty much every theater possible and under many different air forces at the time. This one's capable of carrying a 500 to 100 pound bombs, which they liked, especially in the 14th Air Force, as this one's marked as. Now let's this one's one of the later models with the E marking, having six 50 caliber machine guns mounted in the wings. Previous models had two 50 calibers in the nose and two 30 calibers in the or 303 calibers in the wing. Later expanded to 450 calibers in the wing, or 450 calibers total. Two in the nose, two in the wing. Later models just went to two each in the wing, and then later on 3 each in the wing, updating its armament accordingly. So let's get it going on to a test flight, and we'll start talking. So the Curtiss P-40 Warhawk is an American single-engine, single-seat, all-metal fighter and ground attack aircraft that first flew in 1938. The P-40 design was a modification of the previous P-36 Hawk, which reduced development time and enabled a rapid entry into production and operational service. The Warhawk was used by most Allied powers during World War II and remained in frontline service until the end of the war. It was the third most produced American fighter of World War II after the P-51 and the P-47, respectively. By November of 1944, when production of the P-40 ceased, 13,738 had been built, all at Curtiss-Wright Corporation's main production facilities in Buffalo, New York. Not too shabby for one plant. P-40 was the name of the United States Army Air Corps, and after June 1941, U.S. Army Air Force adopted a name for all models, making it the official name in the U.S. for all P-40s. The British Commonwealth and Soviet Air Forces used the name Tomahawk for models equivalent to the P-40B and P-40C, and the name Kitty Hawk for models equivalent to the P-40D and all later variants. So this would be considered a Kitty Hawk in comparative for our allies. I'm going a little dive bomb here. One of the roles that the P-40 actually excelled at, having a pretty good dive signature. P-40s first saw combat with the British Commonwealth squadrons of the Desert Air Force in the Middle East and North African campaigns during June of 1941. Number 112 Squadron Royal Air Force was amongst the first to operate Tomahawks in North Africa, and the unit was the first Allied military aviation unit to feature the shark mouth logo. Copying similar markings on some Luftwaffe ME or Bf-110 twin-engine fighters. The P-40's lack of a two-speed supercharger made it inferior to the Luftwaffe fighters, such as the, well, I could say arguably inferior to the Luftwaffe fighters, such as the Bf-109 and the FW-190 in high-altitude combat, and was rarely used in operations in Northwest Europe. However, between 1941 and 1944, the P-40 played a critical role with Allied air forces in three major theaters: North Africa, the Southwest Pacific, and China. It also had a significant role in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, Alaska, and Italy. The P-40's performance at high altitudes was not as important in those theaters, where it served as an air superiority fighter, bomber escort, and fighter bomber. Although it gained a post-war reputation as a mediocre design suitable only for close air support, more recent research, including scrutiny of the records of individual Allied squadrons, indicate that this was not the case. The P-40 performed surprisingly well as an air superiority fighter, at times suffering severe losses, but also inflicting a heavy toll on enemy aircraft. Based on wartime victory claims, over 200 Allied fighter pilots from 7 different nations, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, the United States, and the Soviet Union, became aces flying the P-40, with at least 20 double aces, mostly in North Africa, China-Burma-India, and the Pacific and Russian front theaters. The P-40 offered the additional advantage of low cost, which kept it in production as a ground attack aircraft long after it was obsolete as a fighter. On to the design and development and the origins. On on the 14th of October 1938, Curtiss test pilot Edward Elliott flew the prototype XP-40 on its first test flight in Buffalo. The P-40 was the 10th production Curtiss P-36 Hawk, with its Pratt & Whitney R-1830 twin Wasp 14-cylinder air-cooled radial engine, replaced at the direction of Chief Engineer Don R. Berlin by a liquid-cooled, supercharged Allison V1710 V12 engine. The first prototype placed the glycol coolant radiator in an underbelly position on the fighter, roughly at the end of that little bump there, just after the wing's trailing edge. USAAF Fighter Projects Officer Lieutenant Benjamin S. Kelsey flew this prototype some 300 miles in 57 minutes at approximately 315 miles an hour. Hiding his disappointment, he told reporters that future versions would likely go 100 miles an hour faster. Kelsey was interested in the Allison engine because it was sturdy and dependable, and it had a smooth, predictable power curve. The V12 engine offered as much power as a radial engine, but had a smaller frontal area and allowed a more streamlined cowl than an aircraft with a radial engine, promising a theoretical 5% increase in top speed. Curtiss engineers worked to improve the XP-40's speed by moving the radiator forward in steps. Seeing little gain, Kelsey ordered the aircraft to be evaluated in an Anaka wind tunnel to identify solutions for better aerodynamic qualities. From the 28th of March to 11th April of 1938, the prototype was studied by NACA. Based on the data data obtained, Curtiss moved the glycol coolant radiator forward to the chin, as it now sits. That nice chin view there makes it look so mean and damaging. That's one of the things I love about the plane. I got distracted. Its new air scoop also accommodated the oil cooler air intake. Other improvements to the landing gear doors and the exhaust manifold combined to give performance that was satisfactory to the USAAF. Without the beneficial tailwinds, Kelsey flew the XP-40 from Wright Field back to Curtis's plant, Buffalo, at an average speed of 354 miles per hour, a significant improvement from it before the wind tunnel tests. Further tests in December of 1939 proved the fighter could reach 366 miles per hour. Performance characteristics. The P-40 was conceived as a pursuit aircraft and was agile at low and medium altitudes, but suffered from a lack of power at high altitudes. At medium and high speeds, it was one of the tightest turning early monoplane designs of the war, and could outturn most opponents that it faced in North Africa and the Russian front. In the Pacific theater, it was outturned at lower speeds by the lightweight fighters, the A6M0 and the Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar, which lacked the P-40's structural strength for high-speed hard turns. The American Volunteer Group Commander, Claire Chenault, supreme badass, advised against prolonged dogfights with the Japanese fighters due to speed reduction favoring the Japanese. If you look below us, you will be passing over Diamond Head. Welcome to Oahu. I've hiked that mountain. Allison's V1710 engines produced 1,040 horsepower at sea level up to 14,000 feet. This is not powerful compared with contemporary fighters, and the early P-40 variants' top speeds were only average. The single-stage, single-speed supercharger meant that the P-40 was a poor high-altitude fighter. Later versions, with the 1,200 horsepower Allisons or the even more powerful 1,400 horsepower Packard Merlin engines, were more capable. Climb performance was fairly poor, depending on the subtype. Dive acceleration, however, was good, and dive speed was excellent. The highest scoring P-40 ace, Clive Caldwell of the RAAF, who claimed 22 of his 28.5 kills in this type, said that the P-40 had almost no vices, although it, quote, was a little difficult to control in terminal velocity, end quote. The P-40 had one of the fastest maximum dive speeds of any fighter of the early war period, and had really good high-speed handling. The P-40 tolerated harsh conditions and a variety of climates. Its semi-modular design was easy to maintain in the field. It lacked innovations such as boosted ailerons or automatic leading edge slats, but its strong structure included a 5-spar wing, which enabled P-40s to pull out of high-speed, high-G turns and survive even some mid-air collisions. Intentional ramming attacks against enemy aircraft were occasionally recorded as victories by the Desert Air Force and Soviet Air Forces. Caldwell said that the P-40s would take a tremendous, quote, a tremendous amount of punishment, violent aerobatics, as well as enemy action. Operational range was good by early war standards, and was almost double that of the Supermarine Spitfire or the Messerschmitt Bf-109. Although inferior to the Mitsubishi A6M0, Nakajima Ki-43, and the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, all of which had much larger fuel tanks. Caldwell found that the P-40C Tomahawk's armament of two 50 caliber Browning AN-M2 light barrel dorsal nose mount synchronized machine guns, and the two 303 Browning machine guns in each wing to be inadequate. This was improved with the P-40D, aka the Kitty Hawk 1, which abandoned the synchronized gun mounts and instead had two 50 caliber guns in each wing. Although Caldwell still preferred the earlier Tomahawk in other respects. The D had armor around the engine and cockpit, which enabled it to withstand considerable damage. This allowed Allied pilots in Asia and the Pacific to attack Japanese fighters head-on, rather than try and outturn or outclimb their opponents, which was very difficult. Late model P-40s were well armored. Visibility was adequate, although hampered by a complex windscreen frame. Show that. And it was completely blocked to the rear in early models by a raised turtle deck, as you can see there. Poor ground visibility and relatively narrow landing gear track caused many losses on the ground to inexperienced pilots. Curtiss tested a follow-on design, the Curtiss XP-46, but it offered little improvement over newer P-40 models, much less P-51 model and P-47 models, and was therefore canceled. And on to the operational history in some of the countries, actually pretty much all the countries, as it performed very valiantly in all of them. For the French Air Force, an early order came from the French Armée de l'Air, which was already operating its predecessor, the P-36 Hawk. The Armée de l'Air ordered 100. Later, the order was increased to 230 as the Hawk 81A-1, but the French were defeated before the aircraft had left the factory, and the aircraft were diverted to British and Commonwealth service, as the Tomahawk 1. In some cases, complete with metric flight instruments. In late 1942, as French forces in North Africa split from the Vichy government to side with the Allies, the U.S. forces transferred P-40Fs from the 33rd Fighter Group to GC-25, a squadron that was historically associated with the Lafayette Escadrille. GC-25 used its P-40Fs and later Ls in combat in Tunisia, and later for patrol duty off the Mediterranean coast until mid-1944, where they were replaced by Republic P-47D Thunderbolts. Let's do a little barnstorming here and see if we die. At 350 miles an hour. Or we do that. It actually accomplished it rather spectacularly. Kind of wondering about our fuel supply. We'll go circle around these carriers. Going for a little landing. Maybe take out that tank with rearmament. On to the British and Commonwealth forces. In all, 18 Royal Air Force squadrons, 4 Canadian Royal Canadian Air Force, 3 South African Air Force, and 2 Royal Australian Air Force squadrons serving with RAAF formations used P-40s. The first units to convert were Hawker Hurricane squadrons of the Desert Air Force, or the DAF, in early 1941. The first Tomahawks delivered came without armor, bulletproof windscreens, or self-sealing fuel tanks, which were installed in subsequent shipments. Pilots used to British fighters sometimes found it difficult to adapt to the P-40's rear-folding landing gear, which was more prone to collapse than the lateral folding landing gear of the Hawker Hurricane or Supermarine Spitfire. In contrast to the three-point landing commonly employed by British types, P-40 pilots were obligated to use a wheels landing, a longer, low-angle approach that touched down on the main wheels first. Testing showed the aircraft did not have the performance needed for use in the Northwest Europe at high altitudes due to the service ceiling limitation. Spitfires used in theater operated at heights around 30,000 feet, while the P-40's Allison engine with its single-stage low altitude rated supercharger worked best at 15,000 feet or lower. Take a drink there. when the Tomahawk was used by Allied units around based in the UK from February of 1941. This limitation relegated the Tomahawk to low-level reconnaissance with the RAAF, Army Coordination Command. Man, I'm going hot. I have to do another circle around. Thankfully, this is a wide, wide runway. A little bit of a rough landing there. Where were we? When the Tomahawk was used by Allied units based in the UK from February of 1941, this limitation relegated the Tomahawk to low-level reconnaissance with the RAF Army Cooperation Command, and only number 403 Squadron, RCAF, was used in the fighter role for a mere 29 sorties before being replaced by Spitfires. Air Ministry deemed the poor P-40 unsuitable for the theater. UK P-40 squadrons from mid-1942 re-equipped with aircraft such as Mustangs. The Tomahawk was superseded in North Africa by the more powerful Kitty Hawk, the D Mark onwards, types from early 1942, although some Tomahawks remained in service until 1943. Kitty Hawks included many improvements and were the DAF's air superiority fighter for the critical first few months of 1942 until tropicalized Spitfires were available. In 2012, the virtually intact remains of a Kitty Hawk were found. It had run out of fuel in the Egyptian Sahara in June of 1942. DAF units received nearly 330 Packard V1650 Merlin-powered P-40Fs, called Kitty Hawk 2s, most of which went to the USAAF, and the majority of the 700 lightweight L models, also powered by the Packard Merlin, in which the armament was reduced to 4 50 caliber Browning Sorry, I messed up on the script here. Let's bomb a tank. Then I'll figure out what the hell I wrote. I got it. Nice. Alright, where was I? In which the armament was reduced to 4 50 caliber Brownings. Oh, that would be the Kitty Hawk 2A. I just wrote that really weird. The DAF also received some 21 of the later P-40K, and the majority of the 600 P-40Ms built. These were also known as Kitty Hawk 3s. The lightweight P-40Ns, the Kitty Hawk 4, arrived from early 1943 and were used mostly as fighter bombers. From July of 1942 until mid-1943, elements of the U.S. 57th Fighter Group were detached to DAF P-40 units. The British government also donated 23 P-40s to the Soviet Union. In terms of combat performance, the Tomahawks and Kitty Hawks bore the brunt of Luftwaffe and Regia Aeronautica fighter attacks during the North African campaign. The P-40s were considered superior to the Hurricane, which they replaced as the primary fighter of the Desert Air Force. The P-40 initially proved quite effective against Axis aircraft and contributed to a slight shift of momentum in the Allies' favor. The gradual replacement of the Hurricanes by the Tomahawks and Kitty Hawks led to the Luftwaffe accelerating retirement of the Bf-109E and to introducing the newer Bf-109F. These were to be flown by the veteran pilots of elite Luftwaffe units, such as Jagdgeschwader 27 in North Africa. The P-40 was generally considered roughly equal or slightly superior to the Bf-109 at low altitude, but inferior at high altitudes, particularly against the Bf-109F. Most air combat in North Africa took place well below 16,000 feet, negating much of the Bf-109's superiority. Excuse me. The P-40 usually had an advantage over the Bf-109 in horizontal maneuvers, turning, dive speed, and structural strength. Was roughly equal in firepower, but was slightly inferior in speed and outclassed in a rate of climb and operational ceiling. The P-40 was generally superior to early Italian fighter types such as the Fiat G50 and the Machi C200. Its performance against the Machi 202 Fulgor elicited varying opinions. Some observers consider the Machi C202 to be superior. Caldwell, who had scored victories against them in his P-40, felt that the Fulgor was superior to the P-40 and the Bf-109, except that its armament of only 2 or 4 .30 caliber machine guns was inadequate. And I would agree with this assessment. The C-202 is a very fast and very nimble fighter, but it is very underwhelming in terms of firepower. Other observers considered the two equally matched or favored the Fulgor in aerobatic performance, such as turning radius. Aviation historian Walter J. Boyne wrote that over Africa, the P-40 and the Fulgor were equivalent. Against its lack of high-altitude performance, the P-40 was considered a stable gun platform, and its rugged construction meant that it was able to operate from rough frontline airstrips with a good rate of serviceability. The earliest victory claims by P-40 pilots include Vichy French aircraft. During the 1941 Syria-Lebanon campaign against the Dewatin, I think that's how you pronounce that, D-520s, a type often considered to be the best French fighter of the war. The P-40 was deadly against Axis bombers in the theater, as well as against the Bf-110 twin fighter engine. In June of 1941, Caldwell of number 250 Squadron RAAF in Egypt, flying as Flight Officer Jack Hamlin's wingman, recorded in his logbook that he was involved in the first air combat victory for the P-40. This was a Kant Z-1007 bomber on the 6th of June. The claim was not officially recognized, as the crash of the Kant was not witnessed. The first official victory occurred on the 8th of June when Hamlin and Flight Sergeant Tom Paxton destroyed a different Kant Z-1007 from the 201st Squadriglia of the Regia Aeronautica over Alexandria. Several days later, the Tomahawk was in action over Syria with the number 3. Oh. My computer seems to have gotten something. And is almost dead. Alright. I think we, hopefully we solved that problem. But I have to do a part 2 if it dies. Alright. Where were we? Several days later, the Tomahawk was in action over Syria with number 3 Squadron RAAF, which claimed 19 aerial victories over French, specifically Vichy French aircraft during June and July of 1941, for the loss of only 1 P-40 and an additional 1 lost to ground fire. Some DAF units initially failed to use the P-40 strengths. Oh, I hear another couple P-40s. Where are they at? Where am I always at? Oh well. Back to it. Some DAF units initially failed to use the P-40 strengths, or used outdated defensive tactics such as the Loughbury Circle. The superior climb rate of the BF-109 enabled fast swooping attacks, neutralizing the advantages offered by conventional defensive tactics. Various new formations were tried by Tomahawk units from 1941 to 1942, including fluid pairs, similar to the German Rot, or 1 or 2 weavers at the back of the formation, back of a squadron in formation, and whole squadrons bobbing and weaving in loose formations. Werner Schorr, who was credited with destroying 114 Allied aircraft in only 197 combat missions, referred to the latter formation as bunches of grapes because he found them so easy to pick off. The leading German expert in North Africa, Hans Joachim Marseille, claimed as many as 101 P-40s during his career. From the 26th of May 1942, Kitty Hawk units operate primarily as fighter bomber units, giving rise to the nickname Kitty Bomb. As a result of this change in role, and because DAF P-40 squadrons were frequently used in bomber escort and close air support missions, they suffered relatively high losses. Many Desert Air Force P-40 pilots were caught flying low and slow by marauding BF-109s. Caldwell believed that operational training units did not properly prepare pilots for air combat in the P-40, and as a commander stressed the importance of training novice pilots properly. Probably a big reason why his P-40 squadron was a very, very successful one. Competent pilots who took advantage of the P-40's strengths were effective against even the best of the Luftwaffe and the Regia Aeronautica. Excuse me. In August of 1941, Caldwell was attacked by 2 BF-109s, one of them piloted by above-mentioned German ace Werner Schorr. Though Caldwell was wounded 3 times and his Tomahawk was hit by more than 100 7.92mm bullets and 5 20mm cannon shells, Caldwell shot down Schorr's wingman and returned to base. Some sources claim that in December of 1941, Caldwell killed a prominent German expert, Erbo von Kaganek? I think it's Kaganek. Credited with 69 kills himself, while flying a P-40. Caldwell's victories in North Africa included 10 BF-109s and 2 Machi C-202s. Billy Drake of the 112th Squadron was the leading British P-40 ace with 13 victories. James Stocky Edwards of the RCAF who achieved 12 kills in the P-40 in North Africa, shot down German ace Otto Schultz, credited with 51 kills, while flying a Kitty Hawk with number 206 Squadron, RAF. Caldwell, Drake, Edwards, and Nicky Barr were among at least a dozen pilots who achieved ace status twice over while flying the P-40. A total of 46 British Commonwealth pilots also became aces in the P-40s, including 7 double aces. On to the Chinese Air Force and the famous Flying Tigers, which actually got me into this plane in the first place when I was young. Good old John Wayne. Also had a toy P-40 when I was a little kid. A little foam one. So I've always had a love for this plane. Down below I will be including a link to a wartime newsreel about the China War and the first AVG, later known as the 14th Air Force. The Flying Tigers, known officially as the 1st American Volunteer Group, or AVG, were a unit of the Chinese Air Force recruited from U.S. aviators. Compared to opposing Japanese fighters, P-40B's strengths were that it was sturdy, well-armed, faster to dive, and possessed an excellent rate of roll. While the P-40s could not match the maneuverability of the Japanese Air Arm's Nakajima Ki-27s and Ki-43s, nor the much more famous Zero naval fighter in slow-turning dogfights, at higher speeds the P-40 was more than a match. AVG leader Claire Chennault, Supreme Badass, trained its fighters to use the P-40's particular performance advantages. The P-40 had a higher dive speed than any Japanese fighter aircraft. Of the early war years, for example, it could exploit so-called boom and zoom tactics. If you're not familiar with the boom and zoom, let's get some altitude and I will demonstrate it. So if you're sitting at a higher altitude from your enemy and you see them down below you, let's pick the corpse of that truck. You would set upon them. Wheel to attack. Get an extreme amount of airspeed built up. Bracket them, fire, and then pull away. This was typically done in pairs and in cycling pairs, so that each time, a new pair would come in, wash, rinse, repeat until everything was dead. The AVG was highly successful, and its feats were widely publicized by an active cadre of international journalists to boost sagging public morale at home. According to its official records, in just 6.5 months, the Flying Tigers destroyed 297 enemy aircraft for the loss of just 4 of its own in air-to-air combat. The original Model Bs received by Chennault and assembled in Burma at the end of 1941 were not well liked. There were no auxiliary fuel tanks, which could be dropped before going into combat, and there were no bomb racks on the wings. Chennault considered the liquid-cooled engine vulnerable in combat because a single bullet through the coolant tank would cause the engine to overheat in minutes. Tomahawks also had no radios, so the AVG improvised by installing a fragile radio transceiver, the RCA-7H, which had been built for a Piper Cub. Because the plane lacked a supercharger, its effective ceiling was 25,000 feet. The most critical problem was the lack of spare parts. The only source was from damaged aircraft. The planes were thought to be what no one else wanted: dangerous and difficult to fly. But the plane had its good features. Its gas tanks were self-sealing and could take hits without catching fire. And there were two heavy sheets of steel behind the pilot's head and back. And the plane as a whole was very ruggedly constructed. In the spring of 1942, AVG received a small number of Model Es, which is this one here, each equipped with a radio, 650 caliber machine guns, and an auxiliary bomb racks, as you can see, which could hold, at the time, 35-pound fragmentation bombs, later upgraded to 100-pound and 200-pound and one 500-pound bomb, as this model shows. Chenault's armorer fitted the new planes with additional bomb racks that held the 750-pound Russian bombs, which the Chinese had in abundance. These planes were used in the Battle of the Salween River Gorge in late May 1942, which kept the Japanese from entering China from Burma and threatening Kunming, which was the main base for the AVG and later 14th. Spare parts were still a major problem, however. Scores of new planes were now in India, and there they stayed in case the Japanese decided to invade. The AVG was lucky to get a few tires and spark plugs with which to carry on its daily war. End quote. They also sent 27 P-40s to other Chinese Air Force units. Oh, hey, there's our other two P-40s. Showing up with them for just a minute. On to the United States Army Air Forces. In April of 1939, the U.S. Army Air Corps, having witnessed the new, sleek, high-speed, inline-engine fighters in the European Air Forces, placed the largest fighter order at the time it had ever made for 524 P-40s. I see my fuel indicators blinking. Time to head home for a minute. I actually noticed it this time. Some speed. Refuel and rearm. A total of 15 USAAF pursuit fighter groups, along with other pursuit fighter squadrons and a few tactical reconnaissance units, operated the P-40 during 1941 to 1945. As was also the case with the Bell P-39 Airacobra, many USAAF officers considered the P-40 exceptional, but was gradually replaced by the Lockheed P-38 Lightning, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, and the North American P-51 Mustang. The bulk of the fighter operations by the USAAF in 1942 or 1943 were borne by the P-40 and the P-39. In the Pacific, these two fighters, along with U.S. Navy Grumman F-4F Wildcats, contributed more than any other U.S. types to breaking Japanese air power during this critical period. In the Pacific theaters, the P-40 was the main USAAF fighter in the Southwest Pacific and Pacific Ocean theaters during 1941 and 1942. At Pearl Harbor and in the Philippines, USAAF P-40 squadrons suffered crippling losses on the ground and in the air to Japanese fighters, such as the A6M-0 and the Ki-43 Oscar, respectively. During the attack on Pearl Harbor, most of the U.S. Army Air Corps fighters were P-40Bs. Most of which were destroyed. However, a few P-40s managed to get in the air and shoot down several Japanese aircraft, most notably by George Welsh and Kenneth Taylor. In the Dutch East Indies campaign, the 17th Pursuit Squadron Provisional, formed from USAAF pilots evacuated from the Philippines, claimed 49 Japanese aircraft destroyed for the loss of 17 P-40s. The U.S. seaplane tender, the USS Langley, was sunk by Japanese airplanes while delivering P-40s to Java. In the Solomon Islands and New Guinea campaigns, and the air defense of Australia, improved tactics and training allowed the USAAF to better use the strengths of the P-40. Due to aircraft fatigue, scarcity of spare parts, and replacement problems, the U.S. 5th Air Force and Royal Australian Air Force created a joint P-40 management replacement pool on the 30th of July 1942, and many P-40s went back and forth between the two respective air forces. The 49th Fighter Group was in action in the Pacific from the beginning of the war. Robert de Haven scored 10 kills of 14 overall in the P-40 with the 49th Fighter Group. He compared the P-40 favorably with the P-38. Quote, "If you flew wisely, the P-40 was a very capable aircraft. It could outturn a P-38, a fact that some pilots didn't realize when they made the transition between the two aircraft. The real problem was its lack of range. As we pushed the Japanese back, P-40 pilots were slowly left out of the war. So when I moved to P-38s, an excellent aircraft, I did not believe that the P-40 was an inferior fighter, but because I knew the P-38 would allow us to reach the enemy. I was a fighter pilot, and that's what I was supposed to do." End quote. The 8th, 15th, 18th, 24th, 49th, the 343rd, words are hard, and the 347th pursuit groups and fighter groups flew P-40s in the Pacific theaters between 1941 and 1945, with most units converting to P-38s from 1943 to 1944. I lost my place. In 1945, the 71st Reconnaissance Group employed them as armed forward air controllers during ground operations in the Philippines until it received delivery of P-51s. They claimed 655 aerial victories in P-40s. Contrary to conventional wisdom, with sufficient altitude, the P-40 could turn with the A6M and other Japanese fighters, using a combination of nose-down vertical turn with a bank turn, a technique known as a low yo-yo. Now, I have not perfected this tactic, otherwise I would show it to you. It's not an easy one. Robert de Haven describes how this tactic was used in the 49th Fighter Group. Quote, "You could fight a Jap on even terms, but you had to make him fight your way. He could outturn you at slow speed. You could outturn him at high speed. When you got into a turning fight with him, you dropped your nose down so you kept your airspeed up, and you could outturn him. At low speed, he could outroll you because of those big ailerons on the zero. If your speed was up over 275 miles an hour, you could outroll a zero. His big ailerons didn't have the strength to make high-speed rolls. You could push things too, because if you decided to go home, you could go home. He couldn't because you could outrun him. That left you in control of the fight. And on to the China-Burma-India theater. The USAAF and Chinese P-40 pilots performed well in this theater against many Japanese types such as the Ki-43, Nakajima Ki-44 Tojo, and the Zero. The P-40 remained in use in the Chinese Burma-India theater, or the CBI, until 1944, and was reportedly preferred over the P-51 Mustang by some U.S. pilots flying in China. A big factor for this was that they were flying on underdeveloped runways quite a bit of the time, and the P-40 did not have the radiator scoop right on the belly, where it collected a lot of mud and water on takeoff and landing, requiring a lot of maintenance to the P-51 compared to the high intake, tall intake of the P-40. It had a better situated scoop for that type of weather and environment. The American volunteer group, Flying Tigers, was integrated into the USAAF as the 23rd Fighter Group, and later the 14th Fighter Wing, or 14th as part of the 14th Air Force, if I can read my own damn script, in June of 1942. The unit continued to fly newer model P-40s until the end of the war, achieving a high kill-to-loss ratio. In the Battle of the Salween River Gorge of May 1942, the AVG used the P-40E model, equipped with its wing racks that could carry 6 35-pound fragmentation bombs, and Chennault's armorers developed belly racks to carry the Russian 570-pound bombs, which the Chinese had in large quantity. Units arriving in the CBI after the AVG in the 10th and 14th Air Forces continued to perform well with the P-40, claiming 973 kills in the theater, or 6.8% or 68.8% of all enemy aircraft shot down. Aviation historian Carl Molesworth stated that, quote, "The P-40 simply dominated the skies over Burma and China. They were able to establish air superiority over Free China, northern Burma, and the Assam Valley of India in 1942, and they never relinquished it." Excuse me. The 3rd, 5th, 51st, and 80th fighter groups, along with the 10th DRS, operated the P-40 in the CBI. CBI P-40 pilots used the aircraft very effectively as a fighter-bomber. The 80th Fighter Group, in particular, used its so-called B-40s, P-40s carrying 1,000-pound high-explosive bombs, to destroy bridges and kill bridge repair crews, sometimes demolishing their target with one bomb. At least 40 U.S. pilots reached ace status while flying the P-40 in the CBI. In Europe and the Mediterranean, on the 14th of August 1942, the first confirmed victory by a USAAF unit over German aircraft in World War II was achieved by a P-40C pilot. Second Lieutenant D. Schaefer of the 33rd Fighter Squadron intercepted a Focke-Wulf FW-200 C-3 maritime patrol aircraft that overflew his base at Reykjavik, Iceland. Schaefer damaged the Focke-Wulf 200, which was finished off by a P-38F. Warhawks were used extensively in the Mediterranean Theater of Operations, or the MTO, by USAAF units, including the 33rd, 57th, 58th, 79th, 324th, and 325th Fighter Groups. While the P-40s suffered heavy losses in the MTO, many USAAF P-40 units achieved high kill-to-loss ratios against Axis aircraft. The 324th Fighter Group scored better than a 2-to-1 ratio in the MTO. In all, 23 U.S. pilots became aces in the MTO on the P-40, most of them during the first half of 1943. P-40 pilots from the 57th Fighter Group were the first USAAF fighters to see action in the MTO while attached to Desert Air Force Kitty Hawk squadrons, starting from July of 1942. The 57th was also the main unit involved in the Palm Sunday Massacre on the 18th of April 1943. Decoded ultra signals revealed a plan for a large formation of Junkers Ju-52 transports to cross the Mediterranean, escorted by German and Italian fighters. Between 1630 and 1830 hours, all wings of the group were engaged in an intensive effort against enemy air transports. Of the 4 Kitty Hawk wings, 3 had left the patrol area before a convoy of 100-plus enemy transports were sighted by the 57th Fighter Group, which tallied 74 aircraft destroyed. The group was the last in the area and intercepted the Ju-52s, escorted by large numbers of Bf-109s, Bf-110s, and Mach-G C-202s. The group claimed 58 Ju-52s, 14 Bf-109s, and 2 Bf-110s destroyed, with several probables and damaged. Between 20 and 40 of the Axis aircraft landed on the beaches around Cap Bon to avoid being shot down. 6 Allied fighters were lost, 5 of them P-40s. That's a pretty impressive night. Man, imagine it being so scared of your opponent that you have to land on a beach rather than get shot down. On the 22nd of April, in Operation Flax, a similar force of P-40s attacked a formation of 14 Messerschmitt Me-323 Jigan 6-engine transports, covered by 7 Bf-109s from 2 JG-27. All the transports were shot down for a loss of 3 P-40s. The 57th Fighter Group was equipped with the Curtiss fighter until early 1944, during which time they were credited with at least 140 air-to-air kills. On the 23rd of February 1943, during Operation Torch, which was the invasion of North Africa, the pilots of the 58th Fighter Group flew 75 P-40Ls off the aircraft carrier USS Ranger to the newly captured Vichy French airfield named Cazaz near Casablanca in French Morocco. The aircraft supplied the 33rd Fighter Group and the pilots were reassigned. The 325th Fighter Group, known as the Checkered Tail Clan, flew P-40s in the MTO and was credited with at least 133 air-to-air kills from April to October of 1943, of which 95 were Bf-109s and 26 were Mach-G C-202s, for the loss of only 17 P-40s in combat. The 325th Fighter Group historian Carol Cathcart wrote, quote, on the 30th of July, 20 P-40s of the 317th Fighter Squadron took off on a fighter sweep over Sardinia. As they turned to fly south over the west part of the island, they were attacked near Sassari. The attacking force consisted of 25 to 30 Bf-109s and Mach-G 202s. In the brief, intense battle that occurred, the 317th claimed 21 enemy aircraft. End quote. Cathcart wrote that Lieutenant Robert Sederberg assisted a comrade being attacked by 5 Bf-109s, destroying at least 1 German aircraft, and may have shot down as many as 5 before he was shot down and became a prisoner of war. A famous African American unit, the very famous 99th Fighter Squadron, known as the Tuskegee Airmen and later on the Red Tails, flew P-40s in stateside training and for their initial 8 months in the MTO. On the 9th of June 1943, they became the first African American fighter pilots to engage enemy aircraft over Pantelleria, Italy. A single Focke-Wulf 190 was reported damaged by Lieutenant Billy Ashley Jr. on the 2nd, and then on the 2nd of July, the squadron claimed its first verified kill, a Focke-Wulf 190 destroyed by Captain Charles Hall. The 99th continued to score with P-40s until February of 1944, when they were assigned P-39s and brand new P-51 Mustangs. The much lightened P-40L was the most heavily used in the MTO, primarily by U.S. pilots. Many U.S. pilots stripped down their P-40s even further to improve performance, often removing 2 or more of the wing guns from the P-40FL. In service to the Royal Australian Air Force, the Kitty Hawk was the main fighter used by the RAAF in World War II in greater numbers than the Spitfire. 2 RAAF squadrons serving with the Desert Air Force, number 3 and number 450 squadrons, were the first Australian units to be assigned P-40s. Other RAAF pilots served with the RAF or SAAF P-40 squadrons in the theater. Many RAAF pilots achieved high victories with the P-40. At least 5 reached AA status: Clive Caldwell, Nicky Barr, John Waddy, Bob Whittle, all of which had 11 kills, and Bobby Gibbs with 10 kills in the Mid-East, North Africa, and or New Guinea campaigns. In all, 18 RAAF pilots became aces while flying the P-40. Nicky Barr, like many Australian pilots, considered the P-40 to be a reliable mount. Quote, "The Kitty Hawk became to me a friend. It was quite capable of getting you out of trouble more often than not. It was a real warhorse." End quote. At the same time as the heavy fighting in North Africa, the Pacific War was also in its early stages, and the RAAF units in Australia were completely lacking in suitable fighter aircraft. Spitfire production was being absorbed by the war in Europe. P-38s were trialed, but were difficult to obtain. Mustangs hadn't reached squadrons anywhere. They were still pretty much in early development. And Australia's tiny and inexperienced aircraft industry was geared towards larger aircraft. USAAF P-40s and their pilots, originally intended for the U.S. Far East Air Force in the Philippines, were diverted to Australia as a result of Japanese naval activity, and which were the first suitable fighter aircraft to arrive in substantial numbers. By mid-1942, the RAAF was able to obtain some USAAF replacement shipments. The P-40s were given to the RAAF designation, A-29. RAF Kitty Hawks played a crucial role in the Southwest Pacific Theater. They fought on the front line as fighters during the critical early wars of the Pacific War, early years of the Pacific War, and the durability and bomb-carrying abilities of up to 1,000 pounds of the P-40 made it ideal for the ground attack role. For example, the 75th and 76th Squadrons played a critical role during the Battle of Milne Bay, fending off Japanese aircraft and providing effective close air support for the Australian infantry, negating the initial Japanese advantage in light tanks and sea power. The RAAF was units that most used Kitty Hawks in the Southwest Pacific were the 75th, 76th, 77th, 78th, 80th, 82nd, 84th, and 86th Squadrons. These squadrons saw action mostly in the New Guinea and Borneo campaigns. Late in 1945, RAAF squadrons in the Southwest Pacific began converting to P-51Ds. However, Kitty Hawks were still in use with the RAAF until the end of the war in Borneo. In all, the RAAF acquired 841 Kitty Hawks, not counting the British ordered examples used in North Africa, including 163 P-40Es, 42 P-40Ks, 90 P-40Ms, and 553 P-40N models. Yep, time to land again. As we are bingo fuel. You gotta never make a landing like that. That was a completely ridiculous landing. In addition, the RAAF ordered 67 Kitty Hawks for use by Number 120, Netherlands East Indies Squadron, a joint Australian-Dutch unit in the Southwest Pacific. The P-40 was retired by the RAAF in 1947. On to the Royal Canadian Air Force. A total of 13 Royal Canadian Air Force units operated the P-40 in Northwest European or Alaskan theaters. In mid-May 1940, Canadian and U.S. officers watched comparative tests of a XP-40 and a Spitfire at RCAF Uplands, Ottawa. While the Spitfire was considered to have performed better, it was not available for use in Canada, and the P-40 was ordered to meet home air defense requirements. In all, 8 home war establishment squadrons were equipped with the Kitty Hawk, 72 Kitty Hawk 1s, 12 Kitty Hawk 1A, 15 Kitty Hawk 3s, and 35 Kitty Hawk 4 aircraft, for a total of 134 aircraft. These aircraft were mostly diverted from RAF Lend-Lease orders for service in Canada. The P-40 Kitty Hawks were obtained in lieu of 144 P-39 Air Cobras, originally allocated to Canada, but reassigned to the RAF. However, before any home units received the P-40, 3 RCAF Article 15 squadrons operated Tomahawk aircraft from bases in the United Kingdom. Number 403 Squadron RCAF, a fighter unit, used the Tomahawk 2s briefly before converting to Spitfires. Two Army Cooperation Close Air Support Squadrons, the 414 Squadrons, trained with the Tomahawks before converting to Mustang Mark 1 aircraft, and a fighter in a fighter reconnaissance role. Of these, only number 400 Squadron used Tomahawks operationally, conducting a number of armed sweeps over France in late 1941. RCAF pilots also flew Tomahawks, or Kitty Hawks with other British Commonwealth units based in North Africa, the Mediterranean, Southeast Asia, and in at least one case, the Southwest Pacific. In 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy occupied 2 islands, Attu and Kiska, in the Aleutians off Alaska. RCAF Home Defense P-40 squadrons saw combat over the Aleutians, assisting the USAAF. The RCAF initially sent 101st Squadron, flying with Kitty Hawk 1s, to the U.S. base on Adak Island. During the drawn-out campaign, 12 Canadian Kitty Hawks operated on a rotational basis from a new, more advanced base on Amchitka, 75 miles southeast of Kiska. 14th and 101st Squadrons took turnabout at the base. During a major attack on Japanese positions at Kiska, On the 25th of September 1942, Squadron Leader Ken Boomer shot down a Nakajima A6M2N RAAF seaplane. The RCAF also purchases 12 P-40Ks directly from the USAAF while in the Aleutians. After the Japanese threat diminished, these two RCAF squadrons returned to Canada and eventually transferred to England without their Kitty Hawks. In January of 1943, a further Article 15 unit, 430 Squadron, was formed at RAAF Hartford Bridge, England, and trained on obsolete Tomahawk 2As. The squadron converted to Mustang 1s before commencing operations in mid-1943. In early 1945, pilots from 103rd Squadron RCAF, only 1A, operated the P-40N out of RCAF Patricia Bay, Victoria, British Columbia, intercepted and destroyed 2 Japanese balloon bombs, which were designed to cause wildfires on the North American mainland. Fascinating little story right there. In fact, my grandpa was friends with a kid that got killed by one in Bly, Oregon. That was discovered many years after the war. Discovered on accident, killed a number of people. On 21st of February, Pilot Officer E. Maxwell shot down a balloon which landed on Sumas Mountain in Washington State. On the 10th of March, Pilot Officer J.O. Patton destroyed a balloon near Salt Spring Island, British Columbia. The last interception took place on the 20th of April, 1945, when Pilot Officer P.V. Roder, I believe that's how you pronounce it, from 135th Squadron out of Abbotsford, British Columbia, shot down a balloon over Vedder Mountain. Royal New Zealand Air Force. Some Royal New Zealand Air Force, or RNZAF pilots, and New Zealanders and other air forces flew British P-40s while serving with DAF squadrons in North Africa and Italy, including the Ace Jerry Westenra. A total of 301 P-40s were allocated to the RNZAF under Lend-Lease for use in the Pacific Theater, although 4 of these were lost in transit. The aircraft equipped 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th Squadrons. RNZAF P-40 squadrons were successful in air combat against the Japanese between 1942 and 1944. Their pilots claimed 100 aerial victories in the P-40s while losing 20 aircraft of their own in combat. Jeff Fiskin, the highest scoring British Commonwealth ace in the Pacific, flew P-40s with 15th Squadron, although half his victories were claimed in the Brewster Buffalo. The overwhelming majority of RNZAF P-40 victories were scored against Japanese fighters, mostly Zeros. Other victories included the Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers. The only confirmed twin-engine kill, a KI-21 Sally, misidentified as a G4M Betty, fell to Fiskin in July of 1943. From late 1943 and 1944, RNZAF pilots were increasingly used against ground targets, including the innovative use of naval depth charges as improvised high-capacity bombs. The last frontline RNZAF P-40s were replaced by Vought F-4U Corsairs in 1944. The P-40s were relegated to use as advanced pilot trainers. The remaining RNZAF P-40s, excluding the 20 shot down and 154 written off, were mostly scrapped at Rukuhia in 1948. Over in the Soviet Union, the Soviet Voyeno-Vostochny Sili, or the VVS, also known as the Military Air Forces, and the Morskaya Aviatsiya, the MA, or the Naval Air Service, also referred to the P-40s as Tomahawks and Kitty Hawks. In fact, the Curtiss P-40 Tomahawk/Kitty Hawk was the first Allied fighter supplied to the USSR under the Lend-Lease Agreement. The Soviet units received 247 P-40B/Cs, equivalent to the Tomahawk 2A and B in RAAF service, and 2,178 P-40E, K, L, and N models between 1940 and 1943. The Tomahawks were shipped from Great Britain and directly from the US, many of them arriving incomplete, lacking machine guns, and even the lower half of the engine cowling. In late September 1941, the first 48 P-40s were assembled and checked in the USSR. Despite some complaints, Tomahawks and Kitty Hawks were used against the Germans. The 126 IAP fighting on the Western and Kaliningrad fronts were the first unit to receive the P-40s. The regiment entered action on 12th of October 1941. By the 15th of November 1941, just a little over a month, that unit had shot down 17 German aircraft. However, Lieutenant S.G. Smirnov noted that the P-40 armament was sufficient for strafing enemy lines, but rather ineffective in aerial combat. Another pilot, S.G. Ridney, hero of the Soviet Union, remarked that he had to shoot half the ammunition at 50 to 100 meters to shoot down an enemy aircraft. In January of 1942, some 198 aircraft sorties were flown, amounting to 334 flying hours, and 11 aerial engagements were conducted, in which 5 Bf-109s, 1 Ju-88, and 1 HE-111 were downed. These statistics reveal a surprising fact. It turns out the Tomahawk was capable of successful air combat with the Bf-109. The reports of pilots about the circumstances of the engagements confirmed this fact. On the 18th of January 1942, Lieutenants S.V. Levin and I.P. Levsha in a pair fought an engagement with 7 Bf-109s and shot down 2 of them without loss. On the 22nd of January, a flight of 3 aircraft, led by Lieutenant E.E. Lozov, engaged 13 enemy aircraft and shot down 2 Bf-109Es, again without loss. Altogether, in January, 2 Tomahawks were lost, 1 downed by German anti-aircraft artillery, and 1 lost to Messerschmitts. Not too shabby. The Soviets typically stripped down their P-40s significantly for combat, in many cases removing the wing guns altogether in P-40Bs/C types, for example. Soviet Air Force reports state that they liked the range and fuel capacity of the P-40, which were superior to most of the Soviet fighters, although they still preferred the P-39. Soviet pilot Nikolai G. Golodnikov recalled, quote, "The cockpit was vast and high. At first it felt unpleasant to sit waist-high in glass, as the edge of the fuselage was almost at waist level. But the bulletproof glass and armored seat were strong, and the visibility was very good. The radio was also good. It was powerful, reliable, but only on HF, high frequency. The American radios did not have hand microphones, but throat microphones. These were good throat mics, small, light, and comfortable." End quote. The biggest complaint of some Soviet airmen was its poor climb rate and problems with maintenance, especially with burning out the engines. However, VVS pilots usually flew the P-40 at poor emergency power settings while in combat, bringing the acceleration and speed performance closer to that of their German rivals, but in turn could burn out engines in a matter of weeks. Tires and batteries also failed. The fluid in the engine's radiators often froze, cracking their cores, and making the Allison inline engine unsuitable for operations during winter conditions. During the winter of 1941, the 126 IAP Fighter Aviation Regiment suffered from cracked radiators on 38 occasions. Often entire regiments were reduced to a single flyable aircraft because no replacement parts were available. They also had difficulty with more demanding requirements for fuel quality and oil purity of the Allison engines. A fair number of burnout P-40s were re-engined with the Soviet Klimov engines, but these performed relatively poorly and were relegated to rear area use. The P-40s saw most of frontline use in Soviet hands in 1942 and early 1943. Deliveries over the Alaska-Siberia ALSIB ferry route began in October of 1942. It was used in the northern sectors and played a significant role in the defense of Leningrad. The most numerically important types were the P-40B/C, P-40E, and the P-40KM. By the time the better P-40F and N types became available, production of superior Soviet fighters had increased sufficiently so that the P-40 was replaced in most Soviet Air Force units by the Lavochkin LA-5 and various later Yakovlev types. In spring of 1943, Lieutenant D.I. Koval of the 45th IAP gained A status on the North Caucasian front, shooting down 6 German aircraft while flying a P-40. Some Soviet P-40 squadrons had good combat records. While the Soviet pilots became aces on the P-40, not as many as on the P-39 Airacobra, which was the most numerous Lend-Lease fighter used by the Soviet Union. However, Soviet commanders considered the Kitty Hawk to significantly outclass the Hurricane, although it was not in the same, quote, not in the same league as the Yak-1, unquote. That is very untrue, however. The Yak-1 was good, but wasn't that good. Once you get on to the Yak-7 and the Yak-9, then you're talking. Surprisingly enough, we had some in Japan. The Japanese Army captured some P-40s and later operated a number in Burma. The Japanese appear to have had as many as 10 flyable P-40Es. For a brief period in 1943, a few of them were actually used operationally by 2 Hiko Chutai and the 50th Hiko Sentai, the 2nd Air Squadron and 50th Air Regiment in respectively, in the defense of Rangoon. Testimony of this is given by Yasuhiko Kuroe, a member of the 64th Hiko Sentai. During his memoirs, he said one Japanese-operated P-40 was shot down in error by a friendly Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally over Rangoon. Other nations, the P-40 was used by over a dozen countries during and after the war. The P-40 was used by Brazil, Egypt, Finland, and Turkey. The last P-40s in military service were used by the Brazilian Air Force, or the FAB, until they were retired all the way in 1958, having at that point 20 years of flight time. In the air war over Finland, several Soviet P-40s were shot down or had to crash land due to other reasons. The Finns, short of good aircraft, collected these and managed to repair one P-40M, P-40M-10-CU, tail number 43-5925, White 23, which received Finnish Air Force serial number KH-51, KH denoting Kitty Hawk, as the British designation of this type was the Kitty Hawk 3. This aircraft was attached to an operational squadron, HLEV 32 of the Finnish Air Force, but lack of spares kept it on the ground, with the exception of a few evaluation flights. Several P-40s were used by the Royal Netherlands East Indies Army Air Force, that's a mouthful, with number 120 Netherlands East Indies Squadron RAAF against the Japanese before being used during the fighting in Indonesia until February of 1949. Some interesting quotes I found. I would evade being shot at accurately by pulling so much G-force that you could feel the blood leaving the head and coming down over your eyes. And you would fly like that for as long as you could, knowing that if anyone was trying to get on your tail, they were going through the same blurry vision that you had, and you might get away. I had deliberately decided that any deficiency the Kitty Hawk had was offset by aggression. I had done a little bit of boxing. I'd beat much better opponents simply by going for them. And I decided to use that in the air, and it paid off. That was from Nicky Barr, 3rd Squadron, RAAF, and Ace. One of the top aces in the RAAF. Then another quote. Actually, the P-40 could engage all Messerschmitts on equal terms, almost to the end of 1943. If you take into consideration all the characteristics of the P-40, then the Tomahawk was equal to the Bf-109F, and the Kitty Hawk was slightly better. Its speed and vertical and horizontal maneuver were good and fully competitive with enemy aircraft. Acceleration rate was a bit low, but when you got used to the engine, it was okay. We considered the P-40 a decent fighter plane. NG Golodnikov of the 2nd Guards Fighter Regiment, North Aviation Fleet. Russia. Some notable P-40 pilots, and there are actually quite a few. The above mentioned Nicky Barr, RAAF ace with 11 victories. Also a member of the Australian national rugby team. Gregory Pappy Boyington, AVG and later U.S. Marine Corps. It later commanded the USMC VMF 214, famous Black Sheep Squadron. Clive Caldwell of the RAAF, highest scoring P-40 pilot from any Air Force with 22 victories, highest scoring Allied pilot in North Africa, and Australia's highest scoring ace in World War II with 28.5 victories. Claire Chennault, Supreme Badass, commander of the 1st American Volunteer Group, the AVG, better known as the Flying Tigers, in the Chinese Air Force. Daniel H. David, USAAF, later famous as the comedian and actor Dan Rowan, scored 2 victories and was wounded while flying P-40s in the Southwest Pacific. Billy Drake of the RAF, leading British P-40 ace with 13 victories. James Francis Edwards, RCAF, I always want to put an extra A in there, with 15.75 victories, 12 in the P-40. Also wrote 2 books about the British Commonwealth Kitty Hawk pilots. Jeff Fiskin, RNZAF, the highest scoring British Commonwealth ace in the Pacific Theater, including 5 victories in Kitty Hawks. Jack Frost, South African Air Force, the highest scoring air ace in a South African unit, with 15 victories, 7 on the P-40, missing in action since the 16th of June 1942. John Gordon, RAAF, Prime Minister of Australia from 1968 to 1971, flew Kitty Hawks with number 77 Squadron in New Guinea and was an instructor on the type of aircraft. David Lee Tex Hill, AVG, and USAAF. A sec while I stick this landing here. Good. Where were we? David Lee Tex Hill, AVG, USAAF, 2nd Squadron, AVG, and 23rd Fighter Group, USAAF, with 12.25 P-40 victories, with 18.25 in total. Bruce K. Holloway, AVG, USAAF, top scoring U.S. pilot. Top scoring U.S. P-40 pilot with 13 victories, along with John F. Hampshire, later a USAF 4-star general and commander of the Strategic Air Command. James H. Howard, AVG/USAAF, with 6 victories in P-40s, with the AVG later awarded the Medal of Honor following a single action in a P-51 over Europe. Robert Lee Scott, Jr., USAAF, commander of the 23rd Fighter Group, China, with more than 10 victories in P-40s. Kenneth M. Taylor, USAAF, one of only 2 U.S. pilots to get airborne in a P-40 during the attack on Pearl Harbor, 7th of December 1941, during which he shot down 2 aircraft and was wounded in the arm. Keith Truscott of the RAAF, pre-war star of Australian football, became an ace in the UK during 1941 while flying Spitfires, commanded a Kitty Hawk squadron at the Battle of Milne Bay in New Guinea in 1942, and was killed in an accident in 1943 while flying a P-40. Clinton D. Casey, Vincent of the USAAF, 6 kills in various models of P-40 while commanding forces in China. Boyd Wagner, USAAF, while flying P-40s, Wagner became the first USAAF ace of World War II on the 17th of December 1941 during the Philippines campaign. Len Waters of the RAAF, the only Australian Aboriginal fighter pilot of World War II. George Welsh, USAAF, one of only 2 U.S. pilots to get airborne in a P-40 during the attack on Pearl Harbor. Welsh destroyed 3 Japanese aircraft that day. Herschel Green, aka Herky Green, of the USAAF, triple ace with 18 victories, 3 in a P-40 FL, while flying for the 325th Fighter Group in North Africa and Italy. He retired as a colonel. Levi R. Chase of the USAAF was a double ace with 10 kills flying P-40s, F and L variants, in North Africa and the Mediterranean Theater. Commander of the 60th Fighter Squadron, 33rd Fighter Group, top U.S. P-40 ace in the Med, retired as a Major General. Nikolai Kuznetsov of the VVS, Soviet Air Force, Soviet quadruple ace and double HSU, Hero of the Soviet Union recipient, with 21 victories while flying, or 22 victories, while flying P-40Ks in the Eastern Front. Possibly the highest scoring Soviet P-40 ace. Though, he has to contend with this guy, Pyotr Pokrychev of the VVS, Soviet quadruple ace and double HSU recipient. 11 victories out of 22 total while flying P-40s, first Tomahawk then Kitty Hawk, as commander of the 154th IAP. That's where the distinction lies. Kuznetsov was definitely the highest scoring in P-40s, but he was tied with Pokrychev. And then Boris Safonov of the Soviet Naval Aviation, Soviet quintuple with 25 victories, ace, and double HSU recipient, shot down 3 Ju-88 bombers in one engagement while flying P-40E over the Baltic Sea. Survivors of the type. On the 11th of May, 1912, on the 11th of May, 2012, a crashed P-40 Kitty Hawk, number ET-574, was found in the Sahara Desert. No trace of the pilot has been found to date. Due to the extreme arid conditions, little corrosion of the metal surfaces occurred. The conditions in which it was found are similar to those preferred for aircraft boneyards. The Kitty Hawk is now being displayed outside a military museum at El Alamein, having received a makeover many consider to be hideous. Of the 13,738 P-40s built, only 28 remain airworthy, with 3 of them being converted to dual controls, dual seat configuration. Approximately 13 aircraft are on static display, and another 36 airframes are under restoration for either display or flight. Link below, I will have some extra videos. I found some cool ones, including two of these restored planes in action. Man, you gotta hear those engines. They are neat. They're flying low, they're flying fast, and there's a pretty good voiceover with some of what I've covered here. But man, it's worth it for those engines. Also, some newsreel footage and a training video, which you might find boring. Unless you're a big aviator nut, then you're going to find it really cool. Uh, and some description of the China crisis. Actually, a pretty good description of the China crisis. Being covered in the news, including the strongly including the 14th Air Force. All but one of these are actual wartime videos, so that's really cool. The only one that isn't is the one with modern restored aircraft. The one with the 14th Air Group also has a lot of really good air combat footage recorded by P-40s. So I highly recommend checking those out. Thank you for sitting through this really long one with me, and hope you forgive my scratchy coffee throat that I have. It's been bugging me a bit the last couple days, but I wanted to really get this put out. So yeah, thank you for joining me. I will probably be doing a little bit of gameplay with the P-40 here in a little bit. You can see my lineup down there. And yeah, until next week, where we go back to the Germans, I will bid you a very good night.